I wasn't expecting to say this, but I think Fresh might be the best film I've seen this year. Certainly one of the best films. It sounded like something that I would absolutely love. The premise sounded incredible, but there are a lot of similar films that try to do something similar that never quite hit the mark. So my hopes were kind of high, but also a little bit more realistic. But honestly, from start to finish, I absolutely adored it. I am aware that this is not going to be for everybody, but if it is your kind of film, I really think you will love it. This was released in 2022. It's an 18 film, so I wasn't expecting it to be on Disney Plus, but that's certainly where it's currently at. It's directed by McKay, written by Lauryn Kahn, and it stars Daisy Edgar-Jones as Noah and Sebastian Stan as Steve. And Noah, we learn pretty quickly, is not having the best of luck with dating, and then completely by chance. I say by chance, maybe it was instigated on Steve's part, but by chance, from Noah's perspective, she meets Steve in the supermarket or the grocery store, and she gives him her number. And what follows is a series of dates where they seem to be getting along very well. From her perspective, everything is going swimmingly. And he decides to surprise her one day with a trip. And unfortunately, what actually happens is a lot more harmful and damaging and disgusting and disturbing, and from a viewing perspective, absolutely fabulous. I don't know how much information to give without giving spoilers. Based on the IMDb description, there really isn't a lot of information. But when I went into watching it, I had a rough idea of what it was about. So I will kind of discuss, without giving any more information about the narrative, what I thought of it, but then I'll go into a little bit more detail about kind of the crux of the narrative and what the disgusting, fabulously disgusting element is. But I'm not at any point going to give any information about how it ends or how certain problems are resolved or not resolved in some cases. So there'll be no major spoilers, but I will go into a bit of detail. But just briefly, without spoiling anything, I think it's brilliantly shot, brilliantly acted, very unpredictable. There are certain things that I thought might have been slightly predictable, but generally speaking, I wasn't able to work out what would happen next most of the time, and that meant it was fresh and exciting and definitely something that kept me on my toes. I do think the reason, how do I say this without spoiling anything? The reason for Steve's motivations, or the motivation for Steve's actions, I felt like they could have gone into a bit more detail about that. We never really got too much information about the why, or why he was doing certain things. It did touch upon it, but I think I would have liked to have seen more of his other day to day activities and activities surrounding things he did that led him to do what he did. I realise that may not make sense if you haven't seen it. I will discuss in more details in a moment. But basically, I feel like the narrative was pretty fabulous, very well developed, but there were certain areas where I feel like they could have gone into a little bit more information. With regards to it being an 18, it is very graphic in a lot of places. It will definitely not be a film if you are one of a sensitive disposition. There are definitely things in this that will shock and disturb, especially if you're not used to this kind of film. But if you are, like me, if you kind of gravitate towards these films, then I feel like hopefully you will agree that it's a pretty fabulous example of how to do something of this nature and how to do it effectively. I thought the pacing was great, the characters were great, really interesting. Steve's really likable, which is really annoying when you find out what he's doing, and it definitely messes with the mind. Noah is also a very likable protagonist, which was really important because you need to be able to sympathise or feel some level of care for her, otherwise it just probably wouldn't work. I really thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. Okay, so I'll discuss now what this brilliantly disgusting element of it is. But again, I won't actually spoil anything specific. So, the film's gritty meatiness, if you like, is that Steve has captured these various women, obviously lured them with the promise of dates and surprises, and he drugs Noah and then chains her up, and this is because he is very slowly chopping off the limbs of these various women who he has captured to sell the meat. And there are some fabulous scenes where we get to see some of the characters eating this apparently human flesh. And the only bit that made no sense whatsoever to me is when, I won't say who, but one of the characters takes a bite of this cooked human meat and they put the entire chunk of meat in their mouth. And that's unrealistic. If you're trying something for the first time, you take a tentative bite. You don't shove it all in your mouth. That was the only thing about this that I didn't believe. The rest of it, start to finish, absolutely loved it. I'm a big fan of films like Human Centipede and Tusk, and this definitely has a very similar feel in terms of how graphic and disgusting it is, and I absolutely love it. And as I said, I'm not going to spoil what happens at the end, but I thought it was a lot more powerful than I was expecting, and I really thoroughly enjoyed every aspect of this film. As I said, it's one where I thought the premise sounded amazing, but I have seen similar films, nothing exactly the same, but similar films that sounded like they'd be really good, but then they let me down. But that's not the case here. Fresh was on my list for quite a while, but I kept putting it off because I didn't want to be disappointed. I'm so glad I finally took the plunge because, honestly, it's one of the best films I've seen this year, maybe my favourite film of the year. I absolutely adored it.